webinar from TEDU, the Trade and Development Unit of UWI. This evening, we want to talk about the medium-term economic outlook for Trinidad and Tobago. The medium term, as we understand it, is basically after 2 years and up to about 10 years. I think basically that is what economists seem to understand by the medium term. The first 2 terms are the short term, and 2 to 10 is medium term, and after 10 is long term. So some people talk about medium term as 4 or 5 years, but generally up to about 10 we say is a medium term. But we are reflecting on the medium term outlook for this economy. As you know, in the last IMF consultation report, the Article 4 report, they spoke very positively about the medium-term outlook. They talked about the medium-term outlook being relatively good, and they expected that by reforms the government were undertaking, along with some improvement in the gas situation, which is very, which can be contested because I've heard alternative views about the gas situation in the next 5 years. And they felt that the non-energy sector was, in particular manufacturing, was growing, and that would give us some kind of positive medium-term outlook. Now, this is disputed, and I think this is one of the reasons that we wanted to have this discussion. And we felt that we needed to assemble a panel that could probably shed some light on this issue. Now, as we discuss the medium term, we are also going to touch on the budget, which is, now is the midterm for the review of the budget. And certainly the last budget, the 2020-24 budget that was discussed at the beginning of, end of September, beginning of October, we would have spoken about what kind of outlook that the budget was anticipating and what measures were being taken to try to engineer that kind of outlook. So we'd have some of the panelists will touch on that, and we will try to link that to the general outlook for the medium term. Now we have four panelists. The leading one is Professor Hossain Radha, who is a professor in the Department of Economics, UWI. There's no need for me to introduce him. He's well known to all of you. He'll be our first speaker, and he'll be followed by Dr. Atz, who lectures in the Department of Economics and Development Economics. Dr. Atz is also a well-known public intellectual that comments a lot on the economic situation, on the budget, and so forth. So again, there's no need for me to introduce her. And then we have Dr. Tiwari, who again needs no introduction. I didn't see the need to go and check on their CVs to introduce them. Dr. Tiwari, of course, you know him as the former principal of UWI St. Augustine. He was also a minister in the early NER government as Minister of Trade. He also was a Minister of Planning in the 2010 government of the UNC. And he has, of course, other portfolios, but just to introduce him, I think these 3 would suffice. He will be our third speaker. And finally, we have Mr. Vivek Sharan, who is the CEO of Sharan Bookstores, and he's also the president of the Confederation of Chambers, of Regional Chambers of Commerce. He's also well known in terms as a public intellectual. You will see him commenting on various aspects of the economy in the daily newspaper. So we are going to start with, first of all, asking Professor Hossain to make his comments. He will have just roughly about 15 minutes, and the other speakers will have about 10. And let's try to keep within the confines of our presentation so that we can have some discussion. I'm hoping that at least we could get in about 30 minutes of discussion. We would like participants to use the chat and put their questions. And then if they would like to introduce or speak at the end of the presentations, they certainly can raise their hand and do that, and we'll take that on board. So over to you, Professor Hussain. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalez. I mean, as I said earlier, just before people came on, I look forward to these seminars, probably more than the public, because once I see you and Dr. Tiwari present, I come to listen. I think, and I say this for my students who are on board, I wish one day they could say something like that about me and Marlene. Well, I mean, probably me before Marlene. And in the sense that when I see you gentlemen online on a conversation, I know it immediately is going to have substance. And I look forward to the dialogue with you all later on. Now, this year...
Professor, excuse me, can you put this on presentation mode, please?
Okay, yeah, sorry. This year is something I share a lot with my academic colleagues, and I toned it down and I changed it up a bit for the purposes of this conversation here. I think it's critical that government ministers, that opposition members of parliament understand the way this economy works, because I think that's where a lot of the confusion starts. I could use this diagram and write a book. It tells the whole story about the Trinidad and Tobago economy. But let's start for simplicity with two goods produced in Trinidad, a non-tradable goods NT and a tradable goods T. The tradable goods consist of two parts here, an energy good and a non-booming tradable good. The non-booming tradable good, for fanciness, we will call manufacturing, and the non-tradable is really a kind of name for services. So in 1996, or about there, the economy was a point such as A. And at the point such as A, the economy produced NT0 units of non-tradable goods and T0 units of tradable. So that's the base economy. And then Atlantic LNG came on stream. Now, with the coming on stream of Atlantic, what you had coming, to use the terminology of the energy sector, is a lot of gas was brought above the ground. So that, for those of you all familiar with production possibility frontiers, you would see it shifted outwards from this PPF to this PPF here, and output in the economy changed to a large extent. It changed to NT1, T1. So we move to the point B. Now, at this point B, hypothetically, the Trinidad and Tobago economy produced much more tradable goods and was supposed to produce less non-tradable goods, and we were supposed to be in a position of a massive intake of foreign exchange. Instead, though, the economy didn't stay at B. What happened is that the various governments that took control of the economy between 1996 and 2023, but to be specific about 2014, inserted into the economy a variety of interventions that change the structure of production. So if you know the economy well, you would know we introduced things like CPEP and a range of other interventions and a massive amount of spending on transfers and subsidies that saw the economy move from a point such as B, producing T1 hypothetically units of tradable goods and NT1 units of non-tradable goods, to a position such as C. Now, many of you all will remember the position such as C as kind of like 2012, 2013, 2014, where if you compare C with A, you would know that the economy had much more money, a lot more economic activity going on. Except that with the insertion into the economy of all these transfers and subsidies and other types of government interventions, what you had happening is that workers became partly relaxed. Something called the labor force participation rate fell. And as the labor force participation rate fell, I mean, if you have 100 people and you have, out of that 100 people, effectively 64 being willing and able to work, and then it falls to about 55, then this smaller proportion of the labor force that is willing to take part in economic activity in the labor market means that you would have to produce less. So the economy, on account of, in part and in large measure, the activities of transfers and subsidies and other type of interventions by the state, would have drifted somewhere between C and D. So at around 2014, we were operating, producing basically the same amount of tradable goods at T2, but a lower amount of non-tradable goods in T2 prime. So we moved from 1996 producing NT0 units of non-tradable goods and T0 units of tradable goods to a kind of hypothetical position at T1, which was always in a state of flux, and then to position C, from which the interventions we made took us to a point such as D. But the point D had two things happening then that didn't allow us to stay there. At around the point D, really starting with 2010, and none of these things are pure straight lines. They occur in different ways. At a point such as D, what you have happening is that there was a decline in natural gas production and a massive inflow in a slow but continuous way of Venezuelan workers. Now, if you have a decline in natural gas production, obviously you would produce less ammonia, less methanol, less urea, and less LNG. So if you notice, the new equilibrium position E is to the left of gives an output of T3 units of T and T3 units of non-tradable goods, and T3 units of tradable goods is less than we had before, T2, which is not surprising. We are producing much less natural gas. And with the Venezuelans, most of them are unregistered. You have about, some people say 120,000 Venezuelans. Let's call it 100,000, of which about 16,000 are registered. So about 80,000 or so are working in the unregistered sectors, which typically tends to be the informal, non-tradable part of the economy. So we have an increase in non-tradable production in T3. Now, some people would look at a movement from D, Professor Gonzalez, to a movement such as E, which is slightly outwards, and say, well, there was economic growth, and they are not wrong. Let me repeat that. I see ministers making this error all the time. And I'm going to explain what I mean by error. Some people would say we have moved from a position such as D, which is with a labor force participation rate of about 55% or 55%, to a position such as E, which is on a new production possibility curve, representing a different structure of production of NT3 and T3, and say, good, we have experienced economic growth, and they are not wrong. Definitely in moving from D to E, you are experiencing economic growth, but this growth, Professor Gonzalez, is coming at the expense of a change in the structure of the economy. Now, if you have an infinite stock of reserves, that's not an issue. If you have $200 billion in reserves and you are getting economic growth and some reserves are going down because of change in the structure of the economy, I will not even mention that here. But we are at point E now, and really where we want to go is at a point such as F. Notice F is to the right of E and lower than E. Notice F is to the right of E and lower than E. In other words, we want to go to a point on a higher production possibility frontier, so we produce more of both goods. But at the same point in time, the ratio of the structure of production tilts more in favor of tradable goods production, so you could build up your stock of reserves. Now, I'm watching my time, 17, good. Here we see the actual good performance. You can see from 2020 to 2024, I used a base of 2008 for GDP. You could see that economic growth, Professor Gonzalez, is slowly improving in the economy, and I'm using IMF data here. I remember sometime recently I used IMF data and I spliced a series one onto the other and changed the base here, and a minister didn't even understand and tried to buff me publicly. And net foreign reserves fell. And the net foreign reserves, so we have a situation with growth returning to the economy, but net foreign reserves declining. That's not healthy. And that to me is because of the induced change in the structure of production, motivated by a large proportion of our workers coming that are working in the informal sector and that are unregistered there. So they are no, output is increasing. The blue line shows GDP is improving for a variety of reasons, but the stock of net foreign reserves is falling. Not only because of the Venezuelan consumption, but the change in the structure of the economy in the context of some inertia in demand is leading to that type of outcome. Now, Prof. Gonzalez talked about the medium-term outlook. Here we see the good performance of the economy between 2015 and 2022. I am doing some work on the Caribbean region, so I focus more on the Caribbean now. And you can see that we didn't perform so well in the Caribbean region, comparatively speaking, for that time period. And then I looked at the little medium-term period from 2024 to 2026 and showed that while some countries like Haiti would make no progress on Ariba, only about 1.1% progress on average per annum, Trinidad and Tobago average annual economic growth is 1.8. Now, 1.8 is not bad. It's certainly not minus 2.75 that we saw here. So we will take the 1.8, but what I urge policymakers is this 1.8 must not come at the expense of the stock of reserves, because the stock of reserves is a critical variable in conditioning what we could import. And imports, especially capital imports, are a fundamental part of the growth process. So if you continue to erode your stock of reserves and you run out of money to buy capital goods later on, you would end up shooting yourself in your toe. And here we see, transfers and subsidies stacked up against the non-energy trade balance. For those of you all who don't know, parallel to the National Conversation Seminar Series is a National Conversation chat group that consists of a lot of people on this seminar here, where we discuss things like this all day, basically. And so I suspect people like Professor Gonzalez won't be surprised to see this. Then this is the really effective exchange rate, a symptom of full employment and an economy that has most of the people that are willing and able to working is an increase in the price level that is also occasioned by a rise in the size of the non-tradable sector once you are at full employment. And here you can see that as the really effective exchange rate appreciates, the non-energy trade balance worsen. And Prof. Gonzalez, this is one of the graphs I sent you. I think this sends a powerful story in many ways. I also looked at this graph here in per capita form. I look at the non-energy trade balance right throughout the Caribbean, and we had the highest non-energy trade balance per capita, almost 50% more than Jamaica. And that means we will have some serious work to do on our non-energy trade balance per capita. This here shows the ratio of transfers and subsidies to capital injections. We just continue to pour money into transfers and subsidies in relation to capital injection. But if you have an economy at full employment, it is impossible to widen that economy without changing this ratio. This here shows real output per worker in the non-booming tradable sector like the manufacturing and so on is much higher than the non-tradable sector, so the ratio is on the upswing. But at the same point in time, the employment structure is such that non-booming tradable sector employment in relation to non-tradable employment is on the decline. So we are moving in the wrong direction. This here shows the percentage change in the import cover ratio for Caribbean countries between 2010 and 2022. And this is not my data. This data came from the IMF. It shows the trends in gross official reserves and the external public sector debt. Again, data from the IMF combined with central bank data. And you can clearly see here the stock of reserves, or the net official reserves, Professor Gonzalez, is moving in the wrong direction whilst external debt is increasing. This shows that on a trade front, we are not doing that bad. We sell the most products from all the countries listed here. We sell the most products, and we also sell to one of the highest number of markets in both time periods listed. This here shows that our CARICOM market share is falling. And I think because the CARICOM market is a low-hanging fruit, I mean, US dollars is US dollars, wherever you get it from. I looked into the possibilities using SITC 6-digit, 5-digit data, and I pulled out all the strong growth areas between 2008 and 2022 that we could open what I call an ETEC 6-pack, and all the SITC 7 areas that with 5-digit data that are going, so we could open a E-Tech 7 park. That is just a code name to show you where we could, we be the island where it is hot, where people are doing well. I calculated a transition probability matrix for Trinidad and Tobago to show how our policies are affecting our exports. You know, you have 4 sectors here, A, B, C, D. A is less than 1 in terms of comparative advantage. B is 1 to 2. C is 2 to 4, and D is more than 4. And all those red numbers are too high. They should be closer to 0. What it shows is that we have too high a probability of moving from areas of high comparative advantage to areas of low comparative advantage. I show where Caribbean countries and Trinidad and Tobago generate exports from the services sector. And I come back to this point in closing. So I say all of these things to explain that the economy is at the point F, and what all the policymakers should be doing is, yes, so a little pecan and old talk in Parliament is useful, and we are a country that enjoys a little joke, but we are at a stage now at point E where we need to focus heavily on how we move from point E to point F. And what I did here is I outlined some basic suggestions. I'm spending a lot of time, Prof. Gonzalez, calculating where the growth will come from, where we could get growth. So basically, we need to look at areas that we have missed opportunities in terms of export market, who are our rising stars, where our foreign exchange can come from, focus on the extensive margin of export. In other words, if it is we are good at, if it is we are selling yam to 2 countries, try to sell it to 5, or try to sell some new product, focus on the intensive margin. If countries like to buy hot chocolate from us, trying to sell more hot chocolate and so on. Go after greater tourism inflow, convert Carnival into one of the biggest parties in the world. But the problem is the crime. Now, how can you do all of these things with the murders as you see in this country? Our murders per capita, this is the last slide, our murders per capita are one of the highest in the world. We are in the top 10. How do you to sell your country, you have to have comparative advantage, not comparative disadvantage. And here it is, I show if we would, one of the things that was really well done in my view in recent years is the Petrochin fragmentation. You know, we broke down this company and we were able to see Paria making profits, to see Heritage making profits, and we took out the non-profitable part. And the government is trying to work on that by itself, and that's fine. I cannot argue with that. I see all type of commentary. I looked at the data and I endorsed what the government did there in terms of the economic data. And I think we should see if we can encourage Republic Bank and Royal Bank and some of these other banks to lend in US dollars alongside the Exim Bank, and see if we could get payment in US dollars when targeted at the export-oriented sector. If we could target the diaspora for some additional funds, just as we have this Phoenix Park opened with a Chinese block of firms, can we get one with India? That's good. I mean, foreign direct investment, wherever it comes from, will help change our export earnings potential as we move along. And if we could build 2 E-Tech parks with a sort of private sector management, not the same old E-Tech system, but the E-Tech system as it stands, probably with a few more private sector people on the board, for example, and focus on the areas with SITC at 6 and SITC 7. My final words are, I think, Prof. Gonzalez and team, if we use more hardcore statistical economic analysis and economic information, we could chart a way forward. But whilst the technocrats would be able to help and can help if we are consulted, we will not be able to solve the crime situation. And I think the biggest obstacle, crime is not really a part of the ease of doing business as we used to measure it. But in my view, the ease of doing business in Trinidad and Tobago, the #1 factor now, in my professional opinion, is the horrible spate of robberies we are experiencing and the murder situation. And I will stop there. Thank you for the couple of minutes extra and for the time to speak.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Hossain. Now, just to clarify what you're saying a bit, for those of you who may not fully grasp on what Professor Hossain is talking about, essentially he's saying that growth without a larger tradable sector. And here, by tradable, he means exports and competitive import substitutes, where you're able to earn more foreign exchange or gain more foreign exchange. That kind of growth is much better than a situation where your non-tradables, which is essentially what you are importing, the importables, you're importing a lot of things, are so sizable, and in many cases could be larger than the tradable sector, which is your exports and your competitive substitutes. I think the argument is basically that by using the labor in the way we are using it, and especially using the Venezuelan labor, we are promoting the non-tradable sector, along with, of course, the real exchange rate, which we have allowed to make our exports very uncompetitive. So by some kind of flexibility in the exchange rate, we can boost the tradable sector much more relative to the non-tradable sector. So in that sense, we would get a growth that would give us more foreign exchange as compared to the situation where the economy is growing, although at a low pace, but it's growing with the foreign exchange declining. Okay, so I just wanted to summarize basically what he's saying. There's a lot in there. He would tell you that I have a lot there that I usually dispute and I challenge him on, but we'll come back to that. Let's move on to Dr. Atz. Dr. Atz, as I just introduced her, is someone who's always been who always comments on the medium-term economic situation, and so we're always happy to hear her contribution. Over to you, Dr. Atz.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks again to Professor Hussain and his team for inviting me. And of course, I was, my nose was almost glued to the screen listening to Roger, because it is always very interesting to take us back to some of the fundamentals in terms of the nature and structure of our economy. And I think he established a very good platform in terms of some of the information that he presented. And as always, we didn't collaborate on the presentations, but I think that what I will present now dovetails very nicely, and I suspect as well Dr. Tiwari and Mr. Charan, their presentations also will help in terms of kind of solidifying the conversation moving forward. I think we all thought that by now, when we were having this seminar this evening, we would have had the benefit of the mid-year review as part of our conversation, but alas, that has not happened. So we're going to operate with the information that's available to us in the public space. And my presentation really looks at Trinidad and Tobago on the road to sustainable development. It was interesting at the start that Dr. Gonzalez spoke about the 2 to 10 year framework. We have established with many other countries in the world a benchmark of 2030, which is in the next 6 years, for us to achieve some things that we call the Sustainable Development Goals. And while my presentation is not going to look at the Sustainable Development Goals themselves, they certainly capture what we say we want to be in the medium term. We want to be a country that is advanced in terms of some of these development metrics. But the development metrics are predicated on things like the economic growth that Roger would have spoken of in his presentation. So I want to begin by, essentially my narrative is framed around where we are, where are we aiming to be, and what are the gaps and what I call the policy considerations to close those gaps. And my presentation takes from some IMF data, which I will come to in a little while, but also from the recent annual report disseminated by the Central Bank, the annual report for 2023. And essentially, that report notes a number of interesting things, which I think Roger alluded to in his presentation. The fact that the energy sector continues to be the driver of economic activity for us in Trinidad and Tobago and the main source of foreign currency. I'm inserting that they're not to focus on the forex situation per se, but to simply kind of bring to the fore in the conversation of how do we advance in terms of the economic growth and how do we look at the medium term. Forex is an integral part of that conversation, as is crime, as Roger would have alluded to. But the Central Bank's annual report talks about the primary source of foreign currency and the energy sector accounting for 67.5%. But there were lower inflows because we know that there have been challenges in terms of pricing of the energy sector, but also in terms of production coming out of Trinidad and Tobago from the energy sector. So because of those lower inflows, there were tighter conditions. So there was even more difficulty in terms of accessing foreign exchange, which links to Roger's point that we need to do some things differently in Trinidad and Tobago as we move forward, because we cannot always be constrained by foreign exchange and by the volatility in the energy sector if, in fact, we are trying to achieve greater levels of economic growth. So with this tighter domestic condition in terms of foreign exchange, the central bank, of course, drew down on our stock of foreign exchange and intervened in the market, as it were. So in terms of the official reserves, again, coming out of the central bank's website, what we would have seen is that official reserves have in fact declined significantly. If you look from the bottom of the table from 2014 to the top tier 2023, official reserves have declined significantly. We now stand at approximately 7.8 months of import cover, down from 12.9 months of import cover in 2014. And the central bank, of course, made a pronouncement of this as well, talking about the receipts from the energy sector, the largest contributor to overall inflows, decreased to 2.3 billion for the fiscal year 2021-2022. And this was down from US 2.6 billion in the earlier year, 2021-2022. Now, to deal with this shortfall, the central bank, as I mentioned, intervened in the market and they drew down on our reserves to essentially try to maintain the exchange rate and to keep business demand and consumer demand, to meet those demands by injecting funds into the economy. So we're going to come back. So let's park that. There's a conversation, but the idea is that our official reserves have in fact reduced significantly. We're now down to 7.8 months cover taken from the central bank's annual report and also from their website. I want to turn to the question of economic growth, which is often the conversation piece in terms of what is happening in economies. And the economic growth data, whether you look at GDP or GNI, I think it's important for us to look at that in the context of what we call rentier economies. Economies such as Trinidad and Tobago, heavily dependent on oil and gas, on rents, on something that is a natural resource that we simply need to extract to get value from. And that is really what contributes significantly to GDP in our country and to economic growth. And while GDP is important, I think in rentier economies, I think we need to be a little mindful that in economies that are heavily dependent on this natural resource rent, economic growth on its own, while a necessary indicator, it's not sufficient because it shows economic activity, which is really beneficial. You kind of see if your economy is growing or not. It provides an opportunity for higher government revenue. It creates jobs. There are opportunities for a buoyant economy where there is, higher levels and growing economies. So you're seeing increasing levels of economic growth to attract foreign direct investment that can further contribute to economic activity and to economic diversification. But there's a challenge in economies such as ours that are heavily dependent on the energy sector, that we really, because you're so heavily dependent on the oil and gas, this extractive industry, issues of the environment and sustainability often fall by the wayside, as do issues of inequality. So you're so busy earning a lot of money and having, double-digit rates of economic growth in some countries, and I'm going to come to some data in a little while, that you tend to lose sight of the impact of this significant economic growth on issues such as inequality and poverty in your country. But it also can mask your vulnerability to exogenous shocks because there is a lot of money in the system, and very often one loses sight of the vulnerability. And Trinidad and Tobago experienced that, both in terms of depressed energy prices, but also when the Ukraine-Russia conflict started, it became very apparent to us that energy prices were going to be impacted negatively by that, and therefore Trinidad and Tobago's revenues also were going to be impacted. These are some growth figures, GDP figures, taken from the World Economic Outlook database from the IMF, April 2024. And I've essentially pulled out many of the CARICOM countries looking at data and taking it until 2026, where many of the Caribbean countries, the CARICOM countries, are projected to have positive rates of economic growth, all other things being equal. I've highlighted Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago in blue, and I hope you can actually see the distinction in terms of demarcation, in terms of the coloring, because I think it's important for the two major commodity export countries in the region for us to have a look at this. And Guyana, as we all know, has been almost a fairy tale in terms of the extraordinarily high levels of economic growth that they've experienced. In 2020, 43.5, 20.1, 62%, in 2022, etc. Compared, and Guyana is a new oil and gas economy, so to speak, compared to Trinidad and Tobago's aging, more mature economy, actually showing how fast and furious economic growth can occur in a new economy compared to a more mature economy such as Trinidad and Tobago. And you see, Trinidad and Tobago, we've come out of negative growth for several years, and the intention is for us to realize some modest positive rates of economic growth 2024 and 2025 compared to some of our lower than expected compared to some of our other Caribbean countries, Caribbean counterparts, including Guyana, for example. But I want to marry those economic growth numbers by introducing the Human Development Index, which really is, established in the literature as a better indicator of how countries have in fact been using the resources that they earn from their natural resource rents that they earn, or from whatever other productive sectors that they have, how you've been using those to advance development in your economy. And here we have a snapshot from the 2022 Human Development Report showing the human development rank for different Caribbean countries. It's measured along an index between 0 and 1. So the closer you are to 1, the higher your country is doing in terms of its human development rank, so to speak. So the highest country we have ranking in the Caribbean, St. Kitts, Nevis, Antigua, Barbuda, Bahamas, Trinidad is ranked 60 out of 190 UN countries. Barbados ranked 62, up from 63 in 2021. Guyana is ranked 95th, up from 105. But when you look at the disaggregated data, so the Human Development Index looks at life expectancy, education, and per capita GDP. So Guyana has a significant per capita GDP measured in 2022 simply because there is so much economic growth taking place. So the value of their GDP divided by their relatively small population, 700,000 persons, a fairly large per capita GDP of just about 35.6 thousand per person, compared to Trinidad and Tobago at 22,000 per person in terms of per capita GDP. But again, looking at behind the numbers and what is happening in those numbers and whether or not the economic growth is actually translating into development indicators and sustainable development indicators for the countries, you can see that the life expectancy in Trinidad and Tobago at 2022 was about 74.7 years, notwithstanding the impact that mass shootings and crime is having. We still have a fairly decent life expectancy at birth. Expected years of schooling, 14.4 years of schooling. The average years of schooling for Trinidad and Tobago is about 11, compared to Guyana, where the average year is about 8.6, as it were. So I think it's important for us, even as we have the conversation around economic growth and trying to push the economic growth trajectory forward, even as the pendulum swings away from the energy sector and into other sectors, manufacturing, the non-tradables, as Roger mentioned. I think we have to keep an eye on how do we translate that economic growth into something that contributes to the well-being and the development and the sustainable development of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So in terms of, and I think this is the last slide that I have, what are the gaps and the policy choices moving forward? If we accept that the main source of foreign exchange is still the energy sector, and it accounts for 67.5% of the total foreign currency that is put in the market, but we're seeing a decline in forex flows from the energy sector. And according to the central bank's annual report, it says that receipts from the energy sector decreased to 2.3 billion for fiscal 2020 to 2023, down from 2.6. So you're looking at a shortfall of $300 million US. So it is incumbent on us to find another source. There's several options available to us to find another source of forex to make up that gap. Roger spoke about the carnival, and I've often commented that I think while we enjoy carnival as a leisure activity, and we talk about all of the leakages from the carnival sector, I think if we are seriously trying to fill that gap, let us use $300 million US as the gap that is facing us in the medium term. It is probably going to be larger. How do we fill that gap? And one conversation is around our festivals, and carnival as the biggest festival. How do we pull that together as an industry and make it a little more sustainable? Close the leakages in terms of taxes, close the leakages in terms of foreign exchange earnings, and make that a viable contributor alongside some of the other manufacturing sectors that we hear conversations around. Roger just spoke about e-tech parks. How do we bring breathe new life into another e-tech park, so to speak? Carnival is also an opportunity for us. We've made some inroads in terms of the cocoa and chocolates and other niche markets. How do we capitalize those to help them make, bring greater foreign exchange into the country? On the other hand, if there's no supplemental source found to close that $300 million US gap, then the options are fairly simple. We need to curb our appetite for foreign exchange. Otherwise, we will continue to find ourselves in a situation where our reserves are compromised as the central bank injects foreign exchange into the market to meet demand for new cars, a variety of foreign imported consumable goods, etc. We will also draw down on the reserves to meet government debt repayments. So it means that even as we may be gasping that the import cover has been reduced, we also need to reconcile ourselves with how do we change that trajectory? How do we change that conversation in the medium term and also in the long term? But the most important thing, well, one of the most important factors is that the more we draw down on our reserves, the more we compromise our savings for future generations in terms of money that ought to be put into our Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So I want to close at this point in terms of sharing those thoughts, that if it is that we are in fact looking at sustainable development, we need to use our indicators to help us understand and identify where there may be gaps in terms of how we operate, medium-term and long-term gaps in terms of how we operate in Trinidad and Tobago, and how do we navigate our space moving forward to ensure that the economic growth that we experience in Trinidad and Tobago actually translates into economic development and sustainable development for Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Atz. Dr. Atz introduced another dimension, that is to say that instead of looking just simply at economic growth, that is how much, by what percent the economy has grown, 2%, 3%, and so forth. She has introduced the question of human development, sustainable development, and she's introduced some metrics in that regard. She has pointed to the fact that, for instance, even though our growth is low, we still have relatively a better score on the Human Development Index than, let's say, some of the other CARICOM countries as Guyana, in terms of life expectancy, number of years of school, and so forth. She recognizes that there is a foreign exchange problem, like Professor Hussain, and would like to see that gap, which she has identifies as about 300 million US. She wants to see that gap covered by less imports as well as more exports. And she identifies areas like carnival, tourism on the whole, and some other sectors where it is possible to sort of fill that gap. I should point out that we had, I think the last seminar we had with Dr. Nurse, we had a very good seminar, webinar on carnival, where we tried to deal with this question of carnival as a foreign exchange. But we need to move on, and let me go on now to Dr. Tiwari. Dr. Tiwari, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. Good evening, everybody. And I found Roger's contribution very, very penetrating. And I found Marlene making her contribution in the way that she did and talking about the human and sustainable development side as we deal in economics to be very, very valuable as well. Now, we are being asked to reflect on the theme here, which is medium-term economic situation in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'll reflect a bit, and I will ask by sharing some thoughts, and I will ask some questions which I hope will help you to reflect. And I will do this by reflecting on 5 items, which I will indicate just now. I don't know if I'll get a chance to do all, but I will call my contribution rough present, tough road ahead, because I mean, it is possible to talk about a light at the end of the tunnel, but when I identify the 5 variables here, which are critical, and you add into the mix the crime issue that Roger raised, these variables are very challenging to get you to a light at the end of the tunnel. But we are on the road. We are moving forward. Now, we need to reflect on energy since it is the mainstay of our economy and has been for some time. And its role as an anchor of financial stability is now being threatened. So, and energy remains the principal focus of this government. So I think we need to reflect on energy for those reasons. The second thing is non-energy manufacturing. Now, this is the sector that everyone looks to with hope, because in a fundamental way, it has so far stood the test of time. So we will take a look at that. And services, Roger talked about manufacturing and services, which makes up 60% of the GDP of the world's 50 largest economies and has the potential to be a major growth sector in Trinidad and Tobago. Because we must remember that any industrial sector which produces goods inevitably have to be supported by services. But services also constitute a sector in its own right. So I think we want to look at that a little. And thirdly, SMEs and family business and the retail sector, which in the foreign exchange debate doesn't seem to be important, but which are priority drivers of employment, economic growth, and innovation. But this sector is that more vital when other sectors are earning forex. And finally, finance and TT's financial realities and prospects. It is important to assess this because everything depends, whether it's a household or a country, on how much you earn, how much you spend, on what you are spending it, and whether you also save and invest, and whether you borrow, and whether you have a pathway to pay back. So we can't ignore the financial realities of our country. Now, in focusing on these 5 or any other issues in the economy, or even on governance, the ultimate questions are about viability and sustainability. I think the critical issue that Roger raised was the issue of viability. When he raised the question, what is the value of the growth when you are depleting your foreign exchange in the process? And I think the issue of sustainability was raised by Marlene when she raised the question, when you look at the economics and so on, how is that affecting your environment? And how is that affecting your human development? Now, what is viability? Viability is the ability to survive or to live successfully. And sustainability is sustained viability over the long term. And therefore, I want us to keep that in mind as we look at these sectors. Now, how are we doing in energy? In the short term, we are doing bad. In the medium term, if all the ducks are lined up and there are no irreversible slips between the cup and the lip, one can be hopeful that Trinidad and Tobago could be in a good place. According to the Minister of Finance in his budget speech 2024, we are now producing 2.7 billion cubic feet per day. In 2024, that will fall to 2.6 billion. In 2025, likely to fall to 2.5 billion cubic foot per day. I am not saying that. That's the Minister of Finance who likes to deal in numbers saying that. We are likely to be in this situation until 2030, where the shortfall of natural gas will be between 1.5 billion and 1.7 billion cubic feet per day. So that is our short-term dilemma. How to make up the production deficit and revenue. Marlene dealt with the revenue. The hope is that from Woodside and other players in the sovereign domain, and with all going well in Lauren, Manatee, and Dragon, we will attain 4 billion cubic feet by 2030, maybe a little more. I think it should be said that the government has done well to stimulate Woodside to secure long-term arrangements with Venezuela involving multinationals like Shell domiciled here, and with mutually beneficial arrangements for both countries. However, the details of these arrangements are not clear. Some might say not transparent. The TT government also has done well in the negotiations with the USA authorities in securing the OFAC license that seems to operate under the radar of existing sanctions or newly imposed ones on Venezuela, and despite significant transgressions over the 2024 Venezuela election, somehow that seems to be so far protected. Assuming that whatever happens on the political front, licenses will be renewed beyond the current 2-year limit, the medium-term prospect looks positive for Trinidad and Tobago in energy. But all of this depends on when we start and how much of an uninterrupted flow of action can be consistently and persistently pursued. We are short on technical details and details of terms of agreement, and this makes the situation difficult to assess. We are told that Dragon can produce gas in 2 or 3 years, but that means a start date and action. This involves a 17-kilometer pipeline and a $1 billion investment. The details are elusive, but a start date in 2024 will give you gas in 2027. If you start in 2025, that will take you to 2028, nearer to 2030. Lauren Manatee is a shared resource. Our share is 26.25, but we are talking about 10.7 trillion cubic feet of reserves. Here, the continuity of the OFAC license is critical. So start time for both is key, and time is of the essence for our country. The government has done well to make the project realizable by intense negotiation, but action and harmonious continuity is what will make our medium-term position better with natural gas. A positive medium-term outlook, though likely, is not guaranteed. I want to emphasize that. A positive medium-term outlook, depending on the gas strategy, is not guaranteed. I don't think there will be any significant improvement on the oil front. The challenge is how to make it from now until new natural gas flows, and and uh, and for and that has to do with both the petrochemical sector and LNG beginning to realize their potential as well. And that includes Atlantic LNG. For instance, they've done the unitization of Atlantic LNG, which is good for NGC and ourselves. But you have to get the gas first. What to do between now and then? That takes me to this issue of manufacturing. Everybody agrees that diversification from energy and non-energy investments and more non-energy exports to more markets outside will help to solve our forex revenue challenge because of the fall in natural gas production. How to do it and how to do it fast. In his 2024 budget speech, even the Minister of Finance said, and I quote from him, as a priority, we must continue to build and develop our non-energy sector. But how? When? After all is said and done, this is 2024. We have missed a lot of opportunities, and the forex revenue crisis is here and escalating. How is manufacturing progressing in this regard? Some things are happening with regard to manufacturing exports. I think the Exim Bank facility has made a difference. This was an idea from the TTMA, which made its way into the People's Partnership Manifesto in 2015, and which the PNM government embraced much later in 2018 or 2019. And it shows what government-private sector collaboration can do if properly done. It also shows that business in solving their own problems can help to find national solutions. Because let me share this with you. In both 2022 and 2023, US dollars repatriated to Trinidad and Tobago based on manufacturing exports exceeded forex sold to manufacturers by over $100 million for each of those years. That information has been given by the chairman of the Exim Bank in a public forum, which is a good sign that the Exim Bank execution of policy is working and that manufacturers are in fact exporting. Moreover, it demonstrates that if you meet forex demands with rational policy, it can make a difference because policy clarity on its own is an incentive. Since 2018, 766.1 million US dollars have been sold to manufacturers. In manufacturing, food and beverage is TT's best performing sector in non-energy manufacturing. It is a growth industry worldwide, and one aspect of food and beverage that is growing in TT is snacks. TTMA is pursuing a target of doubling exports by 2025 using the base year 2019. And the CEO of TTMA, Mr. Ramdeen, is optimistic that they might be able to achieve that. Professor Hussain, who presented earlier, has been instrumental in working through his strategy to achieve the target with them. Based on the experience of manufacturers and the knowledge of the TTMA, there are lessons to be learned with implications for policy. For instance, there has been a sharp rise in chemical production of things like detergents, dishwashing liquids, hand sanitizers, which may be the result of demand jumps during COVID and habits formed because of good hygiene practices. The scarcity of products because of trade logistics problems at that time, the challenges for China as a supplier, as well as the shortage of forex itself, may all have contributed to increased local production and the creation of a base for an export platform for some of these products. This is really import substitution at work in production in Trinidad and Tobago. TTMA has also noted an increase in contract manufacturing locally and regionally because there is spare capacity of between 15 to 25% in most plants. The challenge is how big can exports grow and how fast in the non-energy manufacturing sector. Now, doubling 2019 exports by 2025, which is a 5-year period, would be a significant achievement. But we must bear in mind that even this will not make the contribution required in the short term. However, the manufacturing sector, with the right framework of support, can make a significant contribution to productivity, jobs, exports, and forex. So it is something that we must try to achieve, the 2025 target, but we must bear in mind that much, much more is needed. The services sector contributed 47.8% to TT's GDP in 2022. In 2021, its contribution is 53.4%, but 70.3% of employment in this country comes from this sector. In 2022, Trinidad and Tobago exported US $896 million. But TT also imported US 3.188 billion. The first figure was also US worth of services. So for both imports and exports, commercial services are most in demand. And we have a sense there that although it is contributing a lot, you don't have the export capacity that you need. What about tourism? I don't want to talk about Carnival, but let's take tourism as a whole. Tourist arrivals in Trinidad and Tobago are embarrassingly low, and the expenditure by tourists is small. This, in my view, is a total policy mistake. And because, I mean, you're talking about relatively negligible numbers. Tourism contributes 9% to the world GDP. Properly marketed with our assets, tourism can easily contribute 10% to the GDP. But we would do well to get it up to 5% over 3 years if we took a systematic approach to it and got all our ducks lined up. Services include financial services, telecommunications, healthcare, education, transportation. Significantly, the ICT sector contributes 3.7% to the GDP. The thriving initiatives are in software development, web design, data processing, ICT training, and software solutions, which can be a mixture of applications and design. So in this sector, we are headed in the right direction. TT's ICT infrastructure is fairly robust, and we produce about 400 ICT graduates a year through the tertiary system. We have a Ministry of Digitalization. We have a company that designs software and applications for large robotics industries worldwide. And the rest of the world is taking off on microchips, big data, artificial intelligence. And we are taking, in my view, no steps to play a successful role in the global value chain. We are attracting no foreign investment that can help us to make technological leaps and absorb learners into the cutting-edge industries that serve the global market. We are missing the boat in getting our act together here. We are not connecting the dots. We are not seizing opportunities. We are not creating synergies, and we are not building global partnerships in the industries of the future. A friend told me a few days ago, if you can't see the future, you will not be a part of it. And we are not seeing the future, nor are we doing anything about it. As an aside, would you believe that in this day and age of self-sufficiency and protectionism almost, and being able to cope as much as possible, every country is trying to do that, to cope as much as possible on your own, that agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago contributes just over 1%, not quite 1.5% to Trinidad and Tobago's GDP, and that the Caribbean as a whole imports 85% of its food. How can this be progress? So we can't feed ourselves in a crunch while the rest of the world is off and running with artificial intelligence. What does that say for our medium-term prospects? It is not about economy alone. It is about the level of self-sufficiency, the level of technological immersion and deployment, and whether we are building a future looking outward or whether we are looking at our navel and longing for the past. St. George's University contributes 25% to the GDP of Grenada. We don't make $1 from foreign students in this country. We have so many hospital facilities, a medical school, and good doctors, and we can't establish a foreign exchange earning medical facility when the US dollar is $70 to $1. When will we do it? So I move on now to the SMEs. In the 2024 budget presentation, the Minister of Finance spoke of implementation of a new SME Forex facility in 6 months. I do not honestly know where that has reached, but we have a callous and cavalier attitude, in my view, to small and medium enterprises in this country, and we do not appreciate the value and virtue of family businesses which can grow into large and formidable enterprises. Bermuda's is a family business. Ansa Makal is a family business. Neil and Massey is a family business. Associated Brands is a family business. Bago and Singh's is a family business. We have about 25,000 SMEs in this country. They contribute about 30% to the GDP, and they employ about 200,000 people, or over 1/3 of the labor force. There is a relationship between small, medium, and big business, and a relationship of these businesses to the communities that they serve and the customers who depend on them and patronize them. I want to make just 2 points on this matter. SMEs and family businesses ought to be actively supported to survive, thrive, and grow because of their economic and social value and community value in addition to their economic contribution. To this end, we need business-friendly policy measures and an encouraging environment to help businesses to flourish, because business is good for the country. Business people feel like targets and they live in fear today. There can be no positive medium-term future for the country if this continues. So we need to give business the opportunity and the environment to survive, to thrive, and to grow. It is not good for a country to have multinationals, conglomerates, big business, and all the rest of people in your country are worker citizens. You need local people in business, small people in business, families in business, communities in business. And we need to help the entrepreneurial spirit to flourish. There must be a notion of shared prosperity and economic participation so that our country can have economic and social viability in the medium and long term. Now, for anything that you do, you need to have the money, and we have a money problem. The issue is not just how much money, it is how our money is spread out in terms of assets, liabilities, obligations, when the shortfall in revenue is going to create sustained pressure for some time, and in a context in which annual growth is really recovery from a 20% GDP fall. And as Roger just pointed out, we are growing in the wrong areas as the foreign exchange depletes. So it will take some time to get back to where we were in terms of GDP and per capita income. At a time where rising prices are a constant, purchasing power is diminished, cost of living is rising in every sphere, poverty and marginalization is increasing, and the equity gap is growing, and the ownership and dispossession gap is also growing. So what is our situation? Our HSF is 5.39. At the rate that we are going to get no energy transfers to the HSF again. The foreign reserves are $5.366 billion on April 2024. And every month you are seeing that falling. And every month you are seeing what is happening because of the impact of the energy sector. Adjusted government debt, the debt is really about 140 billion, but the adjusted government debt is about 110.865. External debt, that's to say the foreign exchange debt, is 5.206. The debt to GDP ratio is 67.6, but that is with a fallen GDP. The projected deficit for 2024 is 5.2 billion. The deficit for all the years of the Minister of Finance's tenure is 62.3 billion. The balance of trade is still in our favor. Between September 2022 and 2023, it was $0.87 billion in our favor. To that, we must remember that 93% of the budget goes into recurrent expenditure, that 7% goes into development, and that a significant proportion goes into transfers and subsidies. So the issues that arise are viability and sustainability. How are we going to survive and live successfully? How are we going to sustain viability over the longer term? Because you see, medium-term viability is based on the prospects in the gas and energy sector. Other sectors might be making progress, but can't catch up fast enough to the point of giving comfort in the medium term. Without fossil fuel gains, the medium term is not viable. And what does that say for the long term? So my summary position is that the present now is very tough, and the road ahead is extremely rough, because if you take these 5 viable variables and you look at how they might map themselves out over the next 5 to 7 years, there is no equation that you can give me that will take us to sustainability, because there is lack of surety, uncertainty in each one of them. And therefore, I have to take the position that we really have to, in a fundamental way, have to have a serious conversation about this country. I don't think that you can leave this country to politicians alone. I think technocrats need to have the benefit of politicians listening to them, understanding what they are saying, and then making sense of it. And finally, the population needs to give their point of view in a way which, from their experience, has value for the business of policy making. Because what is policy for if it does not benefit the people? What is policy for if the human being does not develop and have a trajectory of development for himself, family, etc., out of it? So I will close at this point with the phrase, the present is tough, but the road ahead is very rough and requires some kind of collaborative engagement for the sake of our country.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Tiwari. As you can see, Dr. Tiwari focused on the viability and sustainability of 5 key sectors of the economy. He tends to be very pessimistic as to whether they are viable and sustainable, and tends to point to a medium term that would be relatively unviable and unsustainable. There's a lot in there to discuss, and we have a problem of time, so let me move on right away and turn to Mr. Vivek Sharan. Mr. Sharan, could you make your presentation?
Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Always very humbled to be in the company of some of our amazing intellectual capital, Dr. Roger Hussain, Dr. Malina Apps, and Dr. Boinjnath Tiwari. My perspective will be one from the trenches, ladies and gentlemen. My perspective of where we are in the medium term will be a more practical one, and basically a one from from the small and medium business sector and some of the challenges that we continue to face at this point in time. Now, if you look at before, I have to say that what Dr. Tiwari said, how are we going to make it until new natural gas flows become real income streams, or added real income streams? And that for us is, that's a very pertinent question, because a lot of the issues we're facing, but it has to do with the shortage of US dollars and so on, and with regard to people's disposable income, with regard to the levels of commercial activity in the country, we're not seeing these things getting better. And for us in the small and medium business sector, we often have to face statistics that are printed for us in the papers and so on, and that we see in publications and reports. And when statistics say we are doing well, and there's economic growth and so on, we don't feel it. We down in the trenches, we trying to create business as it is, and make a dollar. We're not feeling the growth. We're not feeling the improvements over time. Now, I want to draw your attention to this first slide. This is real time. This week really. World Container Index, 23rd of May. This is something that's happening currently. There has been a drastic increase in the cost of shipping coming from the Far East, and that obviously is not just the Far East, but it'll also involve shorter trip, America to Trinidad, Panama to Trinidad, that sort of thing. And when we look at this drastic rise as this World Container Index price shows, it's quite considerable. So right now we're looking at, and this is real, they're saying container index increased 16% to $4,072 per 40-foot container. To Trinidad and Tobago from, let's say, the port of Shanghai, or from India, and from anywhere in the Far East, through Panama, it's actually $7,000 as of yesterday. Can we see the next slide, please, Rebecca? And so again, this shows some of the trade routes: Shanghai to Rotterdam, Los Angeles, Genoa, New York. Many small and medium businesses, we import goods from Los Angeles and New York. Many people in that, clothing, accessories, women's accessories, shoes, Many of these things are imported into Trinidad and Tobago. Consumer electronics are imported from, Los Angeles, which is the first port of call for any good coming from the Far East, any ship, coming from the Far East and from New York. And as you can see, looking at the graph, these prices have risen drastically since, let's say, November 2023. Even with that dip in like March 2024, it's still considerably higher than it was in 2023. Next slide, please, Rebecca. So, what this actually says here, it speaks to, the composite index increase, which is basically talking about price increases when it comes to, the cost of shipping per 40-foot container, which it says has increased by 142%, which compared to the same week last year. Now, what does it really mean in a real sense for us, given our current, state where we are now in the economy? What it means for us is in that 35 to 45 days, the cost of inventories that are going to be found on the shelves of our stores in Trinidad and Tobago is going to increase in price considerably compared to the price of importing those same items last year or even last month. So what we're looking at here is when we're looking at some of the things that are imported into our country, whether it is rice, whether it is flour, now actually cereals and flour. If you look at the World Trade, I think it's World Trade Index, the World Bank reports, there has been a drop in the price of flour, which is why national flour mills have dropped the price of flour not too long ago. And, there's been a similar drop in the price of rice. However, when you look at the considerable increase in the cost of shipping, when it comes to low-priced goods, low-priced items, shipping low-priced items, higher costs of shipping affect the prices of these items greater than, let's say, higher priced items. And so what we're seeing possibly what could be inflation for key consumer items, such as food-related items, toiletries, certain pharmaceuticals, and other necessities that people purchase on a daily basis. Now, when we look at retail, the retail sector or commercial retail activity in Trinidad, from where I stand as the chairman of the Confederation of Regional Business Chambers and talking to businessmen almost every week and asking them, one of my first things to ask is, how are things going? How are your sales? How are things compared to last year? Because this, in these conversations, it comes out, where it gives us a sense of where we are. And generally, the sense is that they're not seeing the increases to sales that they were before. And everyone has the same problems with regard to the shortage of US dollars and so on. So what does that really mean? What it means is that more so than ever, we are at a critical point where traditional retail is not as successful as it used to be. Retail outside the sphere of or the sector of food, pharmaceuticals, toiletries, or other necessities, I think is suffering greatly simply because people's disposable income in Trinidad is not increasing. And past their fixed costs and the cost associated with necessities such as food, toiletries, etc., there is not much left after that for them to spend. And I think that most people are constrained right now with regard to their disposable income when it comes to, how much they spend after the key items in their budget, their home budget is looked at. So where do we stand, or what are some of the issues that we're really facing, or what we would like to see at this point? I think that more so than ever, small and medium businesses need to think about diversifying into other sectors, diversifying into, let's say, manufacturing for one. Now, the thing about diversifying into manufacturing is that while many small and medium businesses are interested in diversifying into manufacturing, and they're helped in a sense by certain government grants that through Export TT, there is the grant fund facility which allows up to a max of $250,000 that goes to or half the cost goes towards purchasing small machinery, which you can get in US dollars. And the thing is, while that's possible to access some of these grants, one of the largest barriers to entry for the diversification of small and medium businesses is that of land, that of where are you going to set up your small factory, where are you going to put your plant, where are you going to do your production. Commercial real estate or commercial real estate prices out there for 5,000 square feet in a place like, let's say, Sawa or Shogunas, you're looking at $30,000 to $37,000 a month. When you're looking at getting into manufacturing for the local market, and you're looking at items that can be competitively priced, that can be purchased by retail businesses or by people who are going to act as companies who are going to act as distributors, or you're going to sell to companies that act as distributors. Then it has to be at a price point that allows you to sell to the masses in a sense. And it's difficult to do that when you have one of the largest costs that you're going to face is that of rent or purchasing a property in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, e-tech parks are the answer to that. The issue with e-tech parks is that e-tech parks no longer have the space. And one of the issues with e-tech parks is that when we look at a manufacturing sector, many established businesses and many large businesses were able to utilize the facilities and the advantages of e-tech parks. And therefore, at first instance, why so many people were able to take advantage of this, many of the smaller and medium businesses were unable to get on board in time. And now that they actively want to diversify in a sense, these opportunities aren't there anymore. So one of the things we would like to see going forward, even this year, is that if new e-tech parks are developed, I think it's important to have new policies for first-time manufacturers and to distinguish between startup funding or concessions for new businesses or new entrants into the manufacturing sector, and concessions that are available to larger, more established companies that have established revenue streams both from exports and in the local market. So in a sense, there's a need to separate new manufacturers from existing ones in order to create, more depth and more breadth in the manufacturing sector. Because the thing is this: when we hear about our manufacturing sector doing well, is it that a small percentage of very large companies are doing better because of they're able to enter into new markets in South America and regionally, and they're able to ramp up their production and take advantage of these things? Or is it that as a whole, the manufacturing sector is increasing in its size, and there's so many more products that are able to be substituted locally, or so many more products that people are able to let's say, produce in a sense that can sell at a competitive price for more people to access in Trinidad and Tobago? And I don't believe that that is the case. I think the people that are doing well are doing better, but that we have less new entrants into the manufacturing sector than we should, because almost on a daily basis, many people, there are conversations out there about people wanting to get in the manufacturing sector, but finding the barriers to entry to be too high. And so it leads often to conversations where people are talking about partnerships and so on. But even so, two main barriers to entry are: one, accessing the full amount of US dollars to bring your goods in, or even from the bank; and two, that of setting up, finding a property to set up. Now let me move on to the labor situation, which is another key economic indicator. When we look at the labor situation, what came to mind was Dr. Atts when she talked about, human development, because in a sense, again, talking about manufacturing, I get calls often from people looking for work for young people. And I often reach out to some of the larger manufacturing businesses, some of which I know, to find out if there is room. And one of the things I've noticed is that some of the larger manufacturing, for example, let's say a snack company, particular snack companies are doing very well. And they have a plant system, an operational plant system that operates 24 hours. But despite the fact that they're doing well, they're making more profits. They're selling more overseas, in exports and so on. They have not expanded the plant, or they have not created additional plants because there's no need to. It's not that large of a, I guess, they're not making that much money, or there's not a need for it. and understand that when it comes to plant and technology and processes, right, that no matter how good a company is doing, they are not going to hire more people unless there is additional capacity that is needed, or unless they build additional capacity. And if the manufacturing sector is doing well enough that they're not building additional capacity, then we're not going to see an increase in employment. Now, one of the other knock-on effects, of this is we would like to see, or I would like to see, and I think it's very important for us, right, that we'd like to see an increase in employment within certain regional areas. So we'd like to see an increase in employment and, within certain geographical areas. And that is where small and medium businesses came in, because by doing well and by growing and stuff like that, they were able to hire people from within, the community, within the area. That being said, now we have a situation where many of the larger companies that can do the hiring simply because there's a warehouse or there's, other aspects of unskilled labor that people can find jobs at. They have to travel out of the area. And traveling to Trinidad and Tobago is quite an expensive thing, and many people are finding it's not worth their time. But that being said, people aren't working, aren't choosing to work the way that they do. Now, I looked at some of the educational reports. There aren't much. There aren't any most recent ones, 2023, 2022. But one of the things that was of interest is while it is said that our unemployment rate is, quite low, and so, the fact is when you look at the dropouts from our education system, we're talking about, and this graph, can show it, we're talking about from the age of 14 to 18, 14 to 16, I would say is the sweet spot where the majority of dropouts happen. And these dropouts are significant. You're looking at, the minister herself had, I can quote her saying it's from 2014 to 2022. It's 6,828 young men and women, right? This particular report that I looked at says it's 1,006, right? Between the ages of, let's say, mostly 14 and 16 years, between 2019 and 2022. Yes, COVID had some effect on that. But when we look at where the dropouts are happening, when we look at, according to this particular table, when we look at the dropouts happening in Northeast Trinidad and Tobago, and then I know from conversations with the police that the Northeastern Division is one of the divisions with the highest incidence of crimes, then we begin to see an unsettling pattern. So how are we going to ensure in a country where we're not seeing the level of commercial activity across the board, where we're not seeing the level of growth, which necessitates some of our best performing non-energy sectors, such as the manufacturing sector, to create more capacity, and in doing so, create more employment? How are we going to alleviate some of the problems that we're going to have, and some of the societal problems that are caused by young people who are dropping out of school, and even young people who are finishing school in Form 5 and not getting onto tertiary education simply because financial situation does not allow from finding a job in Trinidad and Tobago. How are we actually going to solve that problem given where we are right now? So one of the last things I'd like to talk about with regard to labor would be the government keeps saying that they keep looking for ways to tax businesses and tax so much. But one of the things we've noticed is that the immigrant labor, the population of immigrant labor in Trinidad and Tobago, actually seems to have a higher disposable income than local participants in the labor force. And maybe the reason for that is they don't pay the taxes, they don't pay the NIS, their contributions, they don't have those contributions, health surcharge and so on, depending on how they get paid. And perhaps if the government were looking for another tax income stream, one of the ways would be to, find a way to give a registered work permit to this immigrant labor force, as it were, and in a sense provide them with a tax number which allows them to work in Trinidad and Tobago, maybe for 2 years and then get it renewed. But while they're doing so, they can work legally, and the government can also collect a tax from them. But what it could also do is it also it also levels the labor market in a sense, because the preponderance of foreign labor in the market, particularly small and medium business, is not insignificant. When you look at, I believe it may be as much as 60, I may be wrong, but I think it's somewhere in the vicinity of 30 to 60,000 people that are working in Trinidad and Tobago, and they're not working here legally, let's say. Now, if the government were to make them legal, because you don't need to be a resident in order to have a work permit or be able to work. If you're able to work, that doesn't necessarily qualify you to vote or have all the rights of a citizen. But, if you're allowed to legally work, then you're allowed to, then you should pay taxes and so on. Then I think it makes it fairer, but it also could help the government situation in a sense. One of the other observations I want to make about labor in Trinidad and Tobago is that while we keep saying that employment is low, and I don't think that there are many employment opportunities in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly for unskilled labor. What we are seeing is a lot of migrant, when I mean migrant labor, I mean a lot of labor moving from one job to the next. So what happens is people end up finding a job, and then they stay in the job for 3 months or 6 months or up to less than a year, and then they move on to another job. And there's a lot of that happening in the country. But what it also describes is what Dr. Hussain has also spoken about, the labor participation rate. Or why is the labor participation rate not increasing? Now, if we look at the number of dropouts over the years, and again, we have no recent data to corroborate what are the dropouts from, let's say, 2022 to 2023. Add that to the amount of kids, the amount of students that look for work after Form 5 and don't go on to Form 6 or tertiary, then, we have to ask ourselves, why are they not working? If they're not working, what are they doing? Right? What are they doing? And is it not imperative for us, for a better society, and perhaps to deal with the crime situation, to be in a situation where we can provide more employment opportunities? But again, to provide more employment opportunities, this can't happen in of itself. It can only happen as a consequence of increased commercial activity in the country, and for certain sectors to be doing well enough again to want to increase capacity to expand and so on, and thereby take on more labor. Now, one of the other things that that comes across when we're talking about Forex is that many people say small and medium businesses are inefficient. They utilize a lot of Forex and so on. Now, one of the things is many small and medium businesses are willing to take the jump to online business, online stores. And I think that's a step in the right direction. However, it's not as easy as it looks, ladies and gentlemen. One of the biggest issues when it comes to digitalization or having an online presence is if you decide to have an online presence and you're successful in having an online presence and you decide that you're going to sell to the region, which is possible because you can ship things via TT Post, FedEx, DHL, other ways. The fact of the matter is that many of our commercial banks, if not all of our commercial banks, do not allow us, if we have a legitimate business and we are retailing online and we're selling to countries in the Caribbean or even beyond, to let's say have an US dollar income stream. I think what they say is that where your account is domiciled, then your income must also be in that currency. So if your business or your account is domiciled in Trinidad and Tobago, then that is where that Trinidad and Tobago currency is what your income stream will be, even if you're selling to the region or to the Caribbean. And so then it begs the question that if you want to earn Forex for your own survival, if you want to earn Forex as a means of diversifying because you have an online store, then the only way of doing so is if you have an account or domicile your business in, let's say, Panama, or domicile your business in perhaps Cayman Islands or some other country in which you would be allowed to access US dollars. So I believe that this is something that perhaps needs to be looked at, because you can't say that, we need to think about being earners of Forex, but yet at the smallest level, at the level where you're saying, well, okay, I have a retail business, I'm putting it online like many others, and selling to the international community, much like people on Shein or vendors on Amazon or whatever, that I cannot have an income stream in US dollars. I have to have my income stream in TT dollars alone. That sort of defeats the purpose. One of the other important things when it comes to where, looking at the economy is that often all the blame is shed at the government and government policy. But one of the things is we have to ask ourselves, what is the role of the banks in Trinidad and Tobago? Is the role of the banks simply to be a business and be profiteering in a sense? So is it that they should also, to a certain extent, dovetail with government policy or government initiatives, let's say, whereby they can also nurture key sectors into a level of growth that is sustainable over the long run. So what we're saying here is, does the banking system have a role or duty to nurture the digitalization of business or the creation of online businesses in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly among small and medium businesses, thereby perhaps making it efficient, thereby giving them an opportunity, if they can't make the jump to be manufacturers, to earn for it? And the answer to that, I feel, should be yes. But in fact, it's not so easy because, we have looked into what it costs to set up an online business. And the monthly fee and the charges and the costs for these things vary greatly across the board from bank to bank. And when you look at the amount of cost, the monthly fee of service charge to be online, which is charged in US dollars per month, but paid in TT dollars. When you look at the per transaction fee of utilizing credit and debit cards, which can be as much as 5%, it begins to become daunting for small and medium people to really say, I can accept the cost of setting up a new business, but then how am I sustaining that if the majority of my sales is going in these external, all these fixed costs? And the funny thing about the per transaction cost, when I looked at it, is that the larger the business is, the smaller the per transaction cost. So a large business or large online retailer can negotiate with the banks for 3%, whereas a small business, the banks will levy 5% transactional charges onto them, which makes it difficult for them to be competitive and actually sell online. One of the other things is fixed charges per transaction, which is in US dollars.
Sharon, yes.
Yeah,
we have a time problem. We have a
right,
time.
so I'm closing up now.
You just wrong.
Right. So what that says is that, in closing, what I have to say is that if we're looking to deal with the consequences of inflation, and if we're looking to deal with people's disposable income where they are, and the fact that disposable incomes in the country is not increasing, when we look at the fact that it's been a very long time before we've really had any data on where the poverty line in Trinidad lies. So therefore, is it greater than what it was before? Is our country right now as competitive as it should be? Is it competitive enough to keep prices low for consumers? Is it competitive enough, meaning that the sectors, retail and otherwise, is populated enough that there should be competition? Or are we seeing over time the growth of monopolies? Are we seeing over time the growth of small clusters of larger businesses? Are we seeing over time the growth of businesses that are price setters and then everybody else under them, particularly when it comes to distribution, businesses are into distribution, and the wide range of necessities and items that they distribute are setting prices for the rest of the economy to follow without any true level of competitiveness? And is this the best thing for the consumer? And is this also the best thing for businesses as a whole in Trinidad and Tobago? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sharon. I've been somewhat indulgent, as you would notice, because it's now, I think, gone past 8:45. I've allowed all speakers to do a full presentation because I realized that all of them have done serious work. You can detect from what they're saying and the references they're making and the data they are pulling that they have done some serious work to come here and deliver a presentation. So in that regard, I felt it was somewhat, and this is something I don't particularly like, people giving you 10 minutes to talk on a subject which really requires at least half an hour. So that's why I felt, well, okay, well, the person has done some work, give them an opportunity to present what they have to say. And in most cases, they were presenting things that were very relevant. Mr. Sharon, for example, from a business perspective, was raising a number of issues which I haven't heard much of, and which as someone in the field is able to draw our attention to, for example, with respect to the manufacturing sector and labor. So we have ended up in a situation where I think we're almost out of time, but let's see how much we could still fit in. I have noticed, and this is the other reason that I didn't stop the presenters. I noticed, for example, by looking at the chat, that we didn't have really many questions. There were largely statements in the chat. I think one question I saw where someone, I believe might have been Dr. Atz, about asking Mr. Sharon, what was the reason for the price of containers, container shipping rising? Because he's arguing that container shipping is leading to inflation, and we all have been reading where inflation is expected to go down in 2020, 2024 as compared to previous years. So I think that is one question I saw. But let us just take a quick set of questions, maybe 2 or 3 questions from participants. I don't know anyone who wants to raise a question. Yes, I see Mr. Leilad Singh. Yes, Leilad Singh, yes.
Just say Jai. Just say Jai.
Jai, yes, all right.
You'll be fine, Professor Gonzalez. Okay, this is a
My
question.
glasses are not my normal glasses I have on here, so I'm having some problems reading.
No problem, Professor.
Go
My
ahead.
question is for Dr. Tiwari. Dr. Tiwari, well, 2 things really. The first thing is whatever you said in your discourse, and I know you have a Thursday column, could you please put some of those notes for our edification in that column next week, Thursday, so that it could be reinforced to us. So that's one. Doc, you said at the beginning you have 5 elements that you want to talk about. Could you just repeat those 5 elements first, please, Dr. Tiwari? Because I think it is critical for economic transformation as we move ahead. Please, thanks. Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez, Professor
Yeah,
Gonzalez.
okay, before Dr. Tiwari replies, let's take another question. We'll take, let's say 2 more questions, and then we'll ask the participants to reply.
So if I could ask a question, Prof. Gonzalez, please.
Yes, go ahead fast, yes.
My question is, I mean, I know you are the host or the chair. I'm asking a question to you, given that I've already heard Marlene, Vivek's, and Dr. Tiwari's perspective. Given your vast experience, including your time at the RNM and your capacity to work with big data sets and blocks of data over long periods of time, how would you approach resolving our foreign exchange crisis, if you don't mind I asking? Thank you.
And Dr. Gonzalez, there's one last question on the chat. Ms. Francis has asked, how does productivity factor into the country's outlook in the medium term? So we can use that as the 3rd question for our panel of experts to comment.
And I'd like to pose the question to Vivek, because the container cost that he's identified in terms of the decline and then the sharp increase, that is going to have potentially an inflationary pressure. So I'd just like some clarification for my own edification as a consumer. What causes that sharp decline, and then what causes the sharp increase? Because I saw an explanation on the chat from someone else, but I just wanted to get some insight from Vivek as well.
Okay, let's move on quickly. We have Dr. Tiwari then sort of replying. I think Jai asked about the 5 variables that you raised, and he asked for some further clarification. Dr. Tiwari?
Dr. Tiwari, you need to unmute your mic, please.
Can you unmute him, Rebecca?
Okay, I got it now. Yeah. Just the 5 areas were energy, non-energy manufacturing, services, SMEs and family business, and finance reflecting Trinidad and Tobago's financial realities and therefore prospects. That's it.
Okay. We have also the question about Roger asked me about how would I resolve the Forex question. I think we have spent about two of our last seminars trying to deal with that. My approach, as you would know, is basically to shift, like you, to more tradables. That is to say, we need to get more businesses into exporting. And the way I think you have to do that is to, first of all, make it more profitable for business to go into exporting. That is to say, relative to importing, I think business people should be able to see more profit in exporting. So that would give them a certain kind of incentive, along with all the incentives that are given by government. And government gives a fair amount already. I saw even in the last budget, they gave on the business levy an incentive for people to go into exporting. And there's a number of other things that they do to try to encourage you to go into exporting. I think these special economic zones, of course, would help in terms of duty-free imports and stuff like that, and ease up doing business to the extent to which you could import easier and stuff like that. That would certainly help. But the key to it, as I see it, is really, I believe in some kind of once and for all change in the exchange rate and keeping the exchange rate at a realistic rate. While it would cause some rise in prices, it should not be too much. We have done it before with the NAR government and even subsequently. And that should give some kind of spur towards business to go into exporting and stop importing. So you get that kind of shift into tradables that, Roger, you spoke about, and that should bring about some kind of increase in exports. As you know, I've spoken a lot about tourism. As a matter of fact, I've been speaking about tourism since I returned to Trinidad in the 70s and the 80s, and when Eric Williams was talking about tourism being servitude, you know, I lived in Switzerland. I saw where tourism was such a big factor and hospitality was a big thing, and the country, even though it had many other sectors, still made a lot of money from tourism. So I've always had difficulty with Trinidad, with all the assets that it has, environmental, natural, you know, all the assets, why it is that we cannot get at least 3 times the amount of tourists that we have here. So that in a nutshell would basically be what I have to say. But as you know, this requires a whole writing of a whole thesis. Let's see if somebody raised the question of productivity. Productivity in the medium-term outlook. I think that was an open question. I didn't know if someone wanted to respond to that. How do we see productivity in terms of impacting on the medium-term outlook? We didn't really touch on that. We all know that there's a productivity problem in the country, and the extent to which we can raise labor productivity or even capital productivity would certainly have some impact in terms of growth and even sustainability in the long run. But I don't know if there are any takers of that. I think it's what I would say basically, if there are no takers, is that yes, certainly we have to try to increase productivity, and it's not an easy task in this country. You just have to look at the traffic situation in this country, and you wonder whether people are concerned here about productivity and the extent and length of time they spend in traffic before they get to work and so forth and all of that. Then you see all the holidays and all of that and so on. You wonder whether that is a concern here. But certainly, as I've always felt that the extent to which you build a market-based economy, that in which you are forced to be competitive, and the extent also to which you force people to export, that in itself would drive productivity. That is, that will come naturally that you have to be productive in order to be cost effective, in order to compete with other nations. Then, of course, productivity will come as a result of that. You know, we can talk a lot about measures you can take to adopt to enhance productivity, but that would be for another discussion. If there anyone else would like to add to that, certainly you can go ahead.
Dr. Gonzalez, I just want to jump in terms of your last comment about productivity. I think it's really a cultural thing. It comes out of our rent-seeking mentality, the fact that we have built economies and built economic success on the basis of oil and gas. So it is not inculcated in us to be a productive society by and large. And the largest part of our workforce, really is employed on the basis of the rents that accrue to the government. So I think the productivity question for us in Trinidad and Tobago could possibly be a larger issue that requires interrogation. I mean, the issue raised on traffic, and that is not going to abate anytime soon. In fact, we think having lots of cars is probably a sign of development in Trinidad and Tobago. So I think first unearth issues around productivity really require, certainly given what has happened, we've not had to engage in agriculture, we've not had to engage in tourism, we've not had to engage in manufacturing to earn our keep because of the energy base that we built our economy on. I think productivity for us is going to be a different kind of challenge, which requires a shift in the cultural mindset. You mentioned the holidays and everything. So next week is one of those weeks that will be a litmus test. We have 2 announced holidays, and people probably will not work for about 10 days.
Yes, well, you raised the question about the container cost, and Mr. Sharon, Dr. asks, how is it that you have a rise and fall of prices? How could you explain that? I think what you're suggesting now, because what we're seeing our prices going down, okay, and you're saying that the price of containers are rising now, which would lead to inflation in the near future. She wants some kind of explanation.
But Dr. Arts, I mean, and anyone else that's interested, it's quite a phenomenon because it's really something that's been happening very quickly, and you know, it didn't start that long ago. So it really started, let's say, sometime in April. Now, it was before that we saw that a bit of that fall simply because those tensions between Russia and Ukraine that led to high energy prices kind of dropped, and so the prices kind of dropped. Then what happened is we had that tension in the Red Sea with the Houthis and ships getting attacked and so on, and there was some concern about passing through the Suez Canal and so on. It appears that that is less of a problem. But myself in my investigating why and me talking to shipping companies and so on, I have to be honest and say that they have been sort of nebulous about the reasons why these shipping rates have skyrocketed. They have been saying things like port congestion, different things. But if you look at it, China has only really, as the main manufacturer from these, China has only really ramped back up to anywhere close to what their capacity used to be, but considerably more than it was during the COVID years. And so it could be that, a greater demand for Chinese goods has sort of driven up this cost, as well as certain geopolitical tensions in the area. But as for 1 or 2 or 3 specific reasons, I have been unable to get to the bottom of what these particular reasons are. That being said, the actual cost that we're seeing now, it's crazy, and there does not seem to be a ceiling. So before, when you were paying $2,500 US or $3,500 US, now you're getting quotes of $7,000 US and above. So definitely it is going to have some, it is going to create some inflationary pressure. Not just Trinidad and Tobago, but I think, in other parts of the world as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sharan. I think we have to leave it at that. It's after 9 o'clock. We were scheduled, I think, to finish up by 8:30. But the discussion was very lively and very, very useful. I think we need to really think how we go forward with some of this discussion. It's very difficult in such a short space of time to deal with some of these issues that we are raising here. But anyhow, I think we have had a very useful exchange. I would have liked to ask each presenter to make a short concluding remark, but I guess we are out of time, so that I'm forced, in a sense, to terminate matters at this point. Let me, on behalf of TEDU, thank all the participants. I think that all the presentations were very well researched, well documented, and well presented, and I think that certainly this was a very useful exercise. I wish also to thank the organizers. There's Dr. Gookool-Bosland, of course, and Mr. Mark Rupchan, who are the people who are behind the scenes. Or not so much Dr. Gookool. She is here with us, of course. But certainly they play a big part in bringing this edition to you. And I think in a sense, their work is not sufficiently recognized. I can testify because I know all the support I get in terms of doing what I do here as a chair. So thanks again to everyone, and thanks again, Roger, for all your support and so on. And let's see how we move forward. I think a number of topics have been raised here, which we can take up subsequently and be concluded.